On this video, we're going to discuss security zones within the SRX. Just a brief overview on how to create them, some of the features within it with address books. We'll touch a little bit on address books, and then we're going to touch a little bit on the policies within the security zones on passing between two separate zones. So let's start off first with get the edit config, and then we're going to do show security zones. So this is we talked about that command in our command video, so it's just a short breakdown of just the security zones within the SRX. So currently we've got on this one, on our lab one, a trust and an untrust. Those are very common displayed out there. Trust being your local internal network, and typically your untrust is your external or WAN network or internet facing interface. That is your basics of how most zones are seen. But zones can be a lot broader than that, in that you could have a zone that's segregating two separate parts of your internal network. So a lot of times in larger enterprises, you won't see typically just a zone trust and then everything underneath it on your local network. A lot of times you'll have multiple zones on your trusted network, but you break it down so that way you can better control the way traffic goes between those various networks. So part of this, we're going to go through and actually create a zone, and then we're going to add that zone's policy in, so that way you can see how traffic goes back and forth and how we can control that. So let's do a couple more show commands that I kind of want to show you a little bit more as it relates to zones. So if we want to actually see how these existing zones were created, we can do the show display set, and we're going to add to it. We talked about that in our commands video, but we're going to add a little bit to that now. Relative to match zones. Now it's only going to show us the display set as it relates to the zones. So here you can kind of see our existing config and how those commands were entered to create what you see in the config set from the show. Alright, so we're going to do kind of the same thing. I want to show the security policies as well, because we're going to be talking about those a little bit too. So as you can see, currently in our security policies, we only have a trust to trust, a trust to untrust zone security policies in place currently. So we're going to add to that. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a new zone, and I want to put it on another physical interface. So let's just do show interfaces, and you can see currently we've got a few interfaces, and I want to put this new one on interface physical interface 5, remote office. So let's create that security zone. So set security zones, security zone. We're going to name it remote office, and we're going to put it on interface gig 005. Alright, so now that we've done that, if I do the security zones, you'll see we now have a new zone. We have a trust zone, we have an untrust zone, and now we have a remote office zone. And so now we want to, now that we've created that interface, or that zone, and we've defined a physical interface that is on that zone. Now we can apply some policies to allow traffic between our trust and untrust zones to our remote office zones. One thing too to realize, I put it on physical interface 5, but you can, depending on your configuration, you could put it on ref interfaces or any type of interface to define what is associated with that zone. But that's where you would need to do it, underneath that security zone, and then define what actually is part of that zone. So now that we've looked at policies and see there's no policy for remote office, we need to create a policy. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a policy for traffic going in between our remote office and our current trust zone. So set security policy from our trust zone to our remote office zone, and we're going to create a policy. We're going to just name this policy HTTP access, and we want it to match source address any. So any address coming from the trust zone going to destination address going to anything on the remote office zone, right? And then what application do we want to apply? So this is where we haven't got into, I'm not going to get into this video, the configuring customize applications and ports, TCP, UDP ports, and that type of thing. But there's some that are already built into the SRX Genospace environment. So let me do a question mark, and you'll see there's some that's already in here. The top ones are some that I've created, but you can see all the ones that have Junos beside it are ones that are part of the existing configuration that you can pull from. So one I'm going to use is Junos-HTTP, which of course will be port 80. So you can see there's lots and lots of them. So I'm going to do application Junos HTTP. Alright, now that I've defined that, now I need to tell this policy, okay, it matches this criteria, what am I going to do with it? So for the HTTP access, if it matches that, then I want to permit. So we want to permit any traffic that matches any source, any destination that equals port 80 HTTP. Alright, now that we've added that, if I do show security policies, you can see now there's a new policy from zone trust to zone remote office policy HTTP access that matches any source to any destination and HTTP. And if it matches that, then we're going to permit it. So let's add some more policies in here. So let's add one that blocks all ping traffic, right? We want to allow HTTP, but we don't want to allow any kind of ping traffic. So set security policy from trust to zone remote office policy, and we'll just name this default block that matches source address any, destination address any, application, we'll do another Junos ping. Alright, now that I've done that, we're going to do the show security policies again, and now you can see, oh, I didn't do the then. See, now you can see how you can look at it and it tells you, hey, you forgot something. So we'll go back to block. Then if it matches it, we're going to deny, right? We want to deny that, because that's what we're trying to do is block ping. Okay, so let's go back to show policies. Now you see that I've added that line in there, that warning is no longer there. So I wanted to show you how that would look. Alright, so now that we've got those in place, traffic coming in, it will look to this first policy. It's in the list. If it matches that, it'll allow it. If it doesn't match that, it'll keep going. It'll get down to this policy and it will ping and it will block it. So let's say we do want to block some traffic from specific source addresses being able to get to the HTTP on that. So let's add that security policy. So let's do set security policy from trust to remote office policy HTTP block. So we're going to block HTTP access, match source address. And so for this, I'm actually going to, instead of saying any or put, I'm actually going to use a name that we've defined in our address book, and I'll get to that here in just a second. But I'm going to use server network destination anything on the remote office. So we don't want anything from the server network on the trust to be able to get to HTTP on the remote office, right? And then application HTTP or Junos HTTP. Then we are going to deny. Okay, so now you can see that we added a rule, HTTP block, source address server, network, destination address any, application Juno. But there's a problem. If you'll notice, it's going to hit this first. So when it hits this HTTP access first, source address any, we've defined any, and so the server network is going to hit this address and go, oh, I'm going to one of these IPs and it's Junos, then I'm going to permit. So it's going to permit it, and it's never going to hit this deny. So the order of what these are in is critical to if you're going to allow or permit. So this is a situation where now that you've got this added, we need to move it up into the above the access. So it'll hit this. If it's a server access, it will deny, and then it will move forward. So let's do that. So to do this, all we need to do is we're going to insert security policies from zone trust to zone remote office policy And we want to move the policy of HTTP block before the policy HTTP access. Now that we've done that and moved it to above it, so we took it from the bottom and moved it up above this one, now whenever one of the server IPs come in, it hits the server network IP and it matches, and it's going to deny. So that's an easy way to move. You could either do before or you could do after. So if it was you're wanting to put it after it, instead of putting before in the command, you would just put after, and it would drop it after it, which is what you would need to do if you were trying to put it on the second one, because you couldn't put it before HTTP block because you want it to be right after. So it's important that you decide if you want to put it before or after, depending on your situation of how you need to line it up correctly. Alright, so now what I want to talk about is I want to talk about where I use the server network, how those names can be used. So let's look at the security zone, and you'll see server network on the trusted was assigned this network /24 class C network. So I was able to specify that name, and it was able to pick that whole server network range in there. So it just makes it easier to be able to tell in your config what you're actually doing. And you'll notice this is in the trust zone. So in the config, whenever I gave it from the source address, the source being the trust zone. If I would have tried to specify it in the destination, then the way this is set up with the address books underneath the zones, then it would need to have been in the remote address zone, because that's the destination too. So this brings to a point of how you initially set up your address book. You can do it as a global, which it doesn't define under any zone, but if you do that, you cannot define any address books underneath the zone. So it's an either or. So either you have all global, or you have all ones underneath the individual zones. As you see, how I've got them set up is underneath each individual zone. And for me, I like this because that way I can see what networks are defined in what zone. If you do it as a global, then it's all mashed together. So you might have trust zone, untrust zone, remote zone, remote zone, remote zone, untrust, untrust. It's just all going to be mixed up within there of what that address is associated with. And then also during cleanup, if you were to remove a zone, that zone is no longer needed. If you go in and you delete that zone remote office, it will remove all those address books that are associated with it, to where if you don't, then all of them are still going to be in your global address book, and you'd have to go in there manually and determine which ones need to come out. So it just depending on how you like to do your config, there's two different options, and the option that I prefer is having them within the zones. So now that we've got this remote office and we've defined it, let's add an address book to it. So to set up an address book, all we need to do is we're going to add an address book for a remote web server. So let's set security zones, security zone, remote office address book, and we're going to do an individual address, and we're going to name it remote web, and we're going to give it a single IP 32 for a single IP. Now if we look at security zones, we now have an address book under the remote office with a specific IP. So let's go back to the policies, and we can see that we're denying anything. So let's say that we're allowing from any place coming in, from any remote office or from any trust going to any remote office IP, it's going to do HTTP. Well, now that we look at it, we just want it to be able to go to that remote web. So we want to change this to allow only from the destination address to that remote web address book that we did. So what you can do is we can just simply edit that policy. So this, instead of doing a set, we're going to do an edit, security, policy, from zone trust to zone remote office. We're going to edit the policy HTTP access and the matching. We're going to hit enter here. Now we're in that matching group. So now we can do commands in here and it'll only affect that. So one thing I want to do is I want to do set destination address, and instead of doing it to just any, I want to specifically have it go to only the remote web address book that we created. Well, I don't want that any in there anymore, so I need to delete it. So let's delete destination address any. Now if you'll notice from the command edit, and it shows you where you're at. So I need to get out of this to be able to get back into the rest of it. So all I have to do is type in top and it'll go to the top of the menu. And now I'm at the top level. And I can do show security policies. And now you'll see it's set for the remote web. Destination, remote office, remote web address book is under the remote web or the remote office zone. So make sure that you're clear and understanding when you use these address books, that when you're doing it within the zone, the address books within the zone, that depending on what zone that address book is in is where you can put the destination address or the source address name address book in, because it has to be directly correlated to remote office for the to zone or the from zone for source address, destination address. Alright, hopefully this will help you understand it a little bit better. It's not a full deep dive, but it does touch some of the basic configuration requirements for creating zones and being able to pass some traffic between zones.